When we think about an African legend, we mostly think about a male figure who used his masculine powers to drive change into the society. But very few stories are told about women that, despite all odds of living in a patriarchal society where women are nothing more than homekeepers, went out of their way to liberate their people and society. In today's story, we walk into the memory of a woman who stood when everybody was forced to kneel. Her name is Menza, also known as Mekatilili or Menza. And this is her story. Hello guys and welcome to Jambaka, the storyteller. Mekatilili was born in the 1860s as Mnyanzi wa Menza in a place called Mutsara wa Tsatsu along the Kenyan coast in the land of the Giriama people in Bamba, in what is today Kilifi County. She was not born into royalty. She was not born into power. She was born into a family of 5 children where she was the only daughter. And like many African children of that time, her life was shaped early by loss. Her brother Mwarandu was kidnapped by Arab slave traders and he was never seen again. To be really honest, that kind of loss does not leave you and it becomes part of you. Mnyanzi wa Menza later got married to a man named Diaka. Diaka lived in Langobaya and together they bore their firstborn son called Katilili, and that is how Mnyanzi wa Menza was renamed Mekatilili wa Menza, which loosely translates to mother of Katilili. They lived together until Diaka passed on and Mekatilili became a widow. In Giriama society, just like many African societies, women rarely held leadership roles, but widows had a voice. They could speak in councils, they could stand before elders and voice their opinions about their society and how it was driven. And Mekatilili or Menza used her voice to challenge the atrocities of the white man was laying on her African brothers and sisters, especially in a cultural standpoint. And I know someone might be there looking at me and wondering, what does he mean by cultural atrocities? So let us give it more context. So the Giriama people were part of the larger Mijikenda community and they lived by their values and traditions. So their identity was tied to their land, the Kaya forest, the customs, and their independence. But by the early 1900s, with the introduction of the colonial rule, their way of life was under threat. The British colonial administration had begun tightening its control. They introduced forced labor, taxes, control over the land, and they even started infiltrating the land, making it hard to move around freely. They also introduced restrictions, even with cultural gatherings. With the introduction of the colonial rule, young Giriama men were taken to work for the colonial interest. They worked in the colonial farms, mines, and others were taken to fight in the colonial army. The Giriama culture, its autonomy, its identity, and the Mijikenda way of life was slowly being stripped away. Mekatilili saw it clearly and it did not sit well with her. On 13th of August 1913, a British colonial administrator in charge of the Kenyan coastal region named Arthur Champion called for a public meeting. During the meeting, he laid out his demands, and among the demands he made were the non-negotiables for the Giriama people, which is compliance to the British rule, tax requirements, labor, submission, among other stringent demands that served the colonial rule. But that day, something unexpected happened. Before Arthur Champion could adjourn the meeting, a woman stood up, confident, chin up, a devil's defiance written all over her expression. Mekatilili wa Menza. She spoke, not quietly, She spoke to be heard. Mekatilili or Menza spoke, not carefully. She spoke her heart and mind. She did something that all the men in the meeting did not have the courage to do. She said things that all the elders will not dare utter openly. If you're enjoying this story, please consider to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us what you think about this episode so far. Anyways, back to the story. Mekatilili came with a mother hen and its chicks and dared Arthur Champion to take one of the chicks from the mother hen and see what happens. So, when Champion tried to take the chick from the mother hen yacked at him, and that is where the analogy comes in. Mekatilili stood and declared that if any Giriama was taken away by the British will get the same reaction as that of the mother hen. She rejected Arthur Champion's demands openly. It is said that she got into such a heated argument with Arthur Champion that she slapped him in public. And if that was not such a red pill to swallow, she took an oath in front of Arthur Champion and his colonial comrades. She took an oath that she and her people, the Giriama people, will not cooperate with the colonial rule. Things really got heated. Chaos, cheers from the people, and in retaliation from all this fracas, the British soldiers shot into the crowd and one Giriama young man was killed. Mekatilili did not stop there, and instead of fighting like the colonialists, she chose not to fight with weapons. She chose to fight with culture. Mekatilili or Menza armed her arsenal with the Kifudu dance, which is a sacred funeral dance, a dance that is meant for mourning the dead. But she used this dance to awaken the living. She performed the Kifudu dance from village to village. She danced from Galana to Godoma to Eruni, which is the present-day Malindi, Ganze, and Kaloleni, respectively. And as she danced, the people gathered, not just to watch, but to listen to her. Mekatilili or Menza ran an activation program against the colonial rule and raised awareness about preserving the Giriama cultural practices. She traveled far and wide in the coastal villages, performing and talking to her people. And all along, she was not alone. She worked with a traditional healer named Wanje Wamaduri Kola. Together, they transformed this resistance into a movement. But often, their enemies would leak the resistance secrets to the colonialists. So, they did the operation at a shrine, a sacred place called Kayafungo, where they gathered the people and they administered an oath. The oath was to never cooperate with the colonial rule. The two oaths were Mukushe Kushe for the women and the Fifth oath for the men. And everyone who went against this oath would drop dead from the wrath of the ancestors. The British, seeing Mekatilili's influence rise by the day, decided to respond. And they did not respond diplomatically. They did not respond with dialogue. They responded with force. They seized the Giriama's lands, drove away their livestock, took their crops, and they burnt down homes. They even went out of their way to destroy Kayafungo, which was the sacred shrine where the Mekatilili and her movement administered the oath. And all this violence led to what is known as the Giriama Uprising, or locally known as Kondo ya Chembe. On October 17th, 1913, Mekatilili was arrested and she was exiled, taken far away from her home to Kisii in Western Kenya. The intention was so simple. The intention was to remove the leader and break the movement. basically cut off the head of the snake. But this is where the story gets interesting. It is said that Mekatilili escaped from the prison in Kisii and walked over 1,000 kilometers from Kisii back to the coast on foot. Think about that. Across forests, across hostile land. And all this she did, driven by only one purpose. And that purpose was to liberate her people. So she went back, led another uprising, and she was arrested again. And she was exiled again. But this time, she was not taken back to Kisii. She was exiled to Kismayo, near Somalia. And yet, she escaped again. And she made a return. And she continued to resist. But by the time she made her second return, the war was subdued. Mekatilili Menza died in the early 1920s, around 1924. And it is said that she died pounding grain in the field. Yeah, pounding grain in the field. Mekatilili Menza was later buried at Bungale in Malindi. But her story did not end there. Decades later, during the Kenya's feminist movement in the 1980s, she became a symbol of resistance, a symbol of courage, and a symbol of female leadership, as she was recorded as the first Kenyan woman to participate in a fight for social change. The Malindi District Cultural Association has been holding the Mekatilili Menza Cultural Festival since 13th of August 2003. And they do this festival annually to commemorate the effort the heroine played in the struggle for independence. What really shocks me is that even years later, after Kenya attained its independence in 1963, there is no major landmark or institution that is named after Mekatilili Menza, despite her heroic effort to liberate her people from the colonial rule. Anyways, this story, it's not just about the colonial resistance. It is about cultural shifts. It is about identity. It is about a woman in a society where women are not expected to lead. It is about this woman who chose to stand up and lead a revolution. Because sometimes the strongest resistance is not fought with weapons. It is fought with conviction. Mekatilili Menza did not just fight for land. She fought for identity. And because of that, stories like this must be remembered. And most importantly, stories like this should be passed down. And because stories like this are to be passed down, please consider liking this video, send it to the next person, and subscribe to the channel for more of this. This has been Jambaka, the storyteller. Bye.